My name is Mason J. I was born in San Francisco here in the late 80s at the tail end of the crack epidemic and at kind of the midpoint of the HIV epidemic. I was born exposed to drugs in utero, and so I was adopted out pretty early. I was adopted out at 9 days old, and I was adopted not into a Black family or a Latin family, which is my background. I'm Black, Mexican, and indigenous. I was adopted into a family of a single mother who is Asian American and white. And one of the blessings I had in being adopted by a family that came from the islands was there was a working knowledge of queer and trans kind of identities. Native Hawaiian trans folks, as we call them in the Western world, are referred to as mahus. And so there's like an existing framework for that type of gender variance. So I started kind of coming out pretty early and exploring my gender and exploring my sexuality at like the age appropriate times, but in very queer ways. Unlike most folks who had families who weren't affirming, my family was entirely affirming. So from the time I was 5 years old, I was affirmed in my gender, both expression and the diversity of my gender. Like I'm very fluid in my gender. Even now, I don't identify as a man or a woman. I identify as two-spirit, which is the term for Native American folks who embody both spirits, both masculine and feminine. So I'm a butch queen, but I'm also a femme daddy. So, there's a bit of both going on in me. And I feel like having access to parents who are affirming of that was one of like the most invaluable things. And it defies the stereotype of being in Black spaces, being in Asian spaces, and dealing with homophobia. Like I didn't actually deal with homophobia inside of my home or transphobia inside of my home. I dealt with it when I left my home. So then home became where I stayed, and I became kind of a shut-in. And my family really quickly realized that although they had created the safest environment possible for me, there was nothing that they could do about the outside world, that the world would always exist around me and always have threats. And things like that. So it was really interesting. My parents, I feel, actually sheltered me more than my siblings who are not queer or trans because they were really worried about my safety. I was probably about 9 years old when I decided that my presentation was really impacting the way I was moving through the world. It's around the time that girls start being bothered by men twice their age, usually in my neighborhood. And so I was literally seeing other people from the neighborhood disappear off the streets. And I thought to myself, well, I don't want that to happen to me. What can I do to make that not happen to me? And so I learned really early that your appearance or the way you are perceived in society could dictate not only your safety, but like your ability to have an autonomous life without being trafficked or being picked up or being bothered by men. So I adopted at the time what I thought was masculinity, but was just really just performative aggression to kind of embody my identity. So even though I was really effeminate, I felt like I was taking on these kind of masculinized presentations just to make it from point A to point B. And the misogynoir, like the misogyny against Black women and Black bodies that went into that was even when girls did go missing, even if their parents did report them missing, the police would just say they were runaways, even though they knew where their children were. Like their children were ending up on street corners and things like that. And so my family was really adamant and really kind of almost thankful that I didn't want to dress feminine. I like to use the metaphor that I went from being prey to predator in terms of perception. Like the Black woman is always prey to take from, and like the Black masculine or male presenting or male passing, in my case, person is like the predator who must be feared. So I carry all the memories of being a Black girl, but also carry all the newness of being perceived as a Black man, which is not a way that I grew up being perceived at all. I grew up in front of cameras, and I was a model from the time I was 5 to the time I was about 12. And so that was the exact opposite of my experience as a Black boyhood. I had the most girly girlhood any child could have had. I was on Barbie boxes, I was on Cabbage Patch Doll boxes, I was lived in LA every summer to shoot pilots for pilot season. So like I did not have a Black boyhood at all. And so I had to kind of create my own Black boyhood when I was 29. I mean, it was really interesting because, there's not a model for the type of masculinity I embody. Ironically, everything I know actually about passing as a man, presenting as a man, living in this world safely as a man, I've either learned from women of color or trans women of color. Cis women being my mothers, my aunts, my sisters, and things like that. And then the trans femme mentors I've had throughout my life, trans Latinas and Black trans women who have empowered me and showed me how to shave, who've showed me how to pass, who showed me how to tie a tie. So it's like really interesting, is everything I know about masculinity I've learned from women. I ironically did not know I could medically transition because I am not a straight and I am not a binary identified person. At the time, the gatekeeping was still a little bit more intense and there wasn't as much freedom in getting allowed access to hormones if you didn't say, I want to be a man. I have always wanted to be a man. I want to hunt and fish. I would like a wife, you know? And so for me, I had considered transitioning as a child. One of my first big gender reveals, as my family likes to call them, was that for my 9th birthday, I asked for a hysterectomy, which is like not at all what most 9-year-old girls ask for most 9-year-old girls don't even know what a hysterectomy is. They don't even know what their period is, a lot of them by that age. But that was my request for my 9th birthday. And so my family knew that something was a little atypical there. Medi-Cal was not having it. You know, this was like the mid-90s. It's still now, even with private insurance, really difficult to get youth on hormone blockers. So, you know, there was no way in the mid-90s that this was gonna happen for me as a young Black girl being raised by a single parent who didn't have the money to just make it happen. So it was something that I had never thought I could do. I was coming out of the beginnings of trauma recovery around a case of complex PTSD that I got from the San Francisco Police Department as a result of a homophobic and transphobic hate crime that happened to me. So it was more so that I was really trying to get myself together and try to heal from all of that. And as is the case with a lot of people, like the only skills I had to cope with at the time were substances. So I developed a bit of a drinking problem and then I had to get myself out of that. And that was kind of when I really started taking the possibility of medical transition seriously. I was like, you know what, if I'm gonna live 3 to 5 more years, I need to get on hormones because I know that I'm just gonna drink myself to death if I have to continue living my life as someone who's only perceived as a woman. So the way I actually started hormones was I basically forced the doctors to put me on hormones by taking hormones that were not my hormones because I knew they couldn't deny me treatment if I had done that. So that's how I got on hormones eventually, was I had to wait. I was put on a 2-year waiting list and I knew that I would not live if I had to actually wait that out. Like I knew deep in myself, I was like, you actually don't have 2 years to just wait for an appointment. So it was probably around my early 20s that I was like, okay, if I actually want to have a productive life and be a functioning member of society, I need to like actually honor the feelings in my body about my gender and address my dysphoria. Trans joy is everywhere. I think a lot of times there are a lot of things that have happened to trans people that we get hung up on. I don't know, I like to say like trans humor is its like own medicine. And like I think just being able to laugh at myself, being able to laugh at others, being able to read the institutions that don't stand for trans people for filth, like I think all of those things allow me to feel better about myself and about the realities of like the world around me and the things that like my brothers and my sisters and my non-binary siblings are all facing. And so I feel like that joy is often found in community and not just when things go bad. Like that's something over the last 3 years I've been really intentional about, is not just communing with like large groups of trans people when something negative happens, is I actually want to be around trans people just because it's Tuesday and like being really absurd, like actually like really funny and just like taking things at like to inappropriate places. Like I laugh alone a lot. Like I actually, that's scheduled into my weekly routines, is I literally make time because I'm saturated with so much negative things throughout the week, so much negative news, so much Black death, that like I schedule like things. And my therapist now actually does prescribe memes. Like that is part of my therapy plan, is I am allowed to make memes, and post them. And that's a way that I can laugh, and other people who are trans and dealing with the same ridiculous questions about their bodies or their transitions or no one knowing they're trans that they can relate to. Trans folks, just because they're not in the trenches anymore doesn't mean they're out of the woods, and there's always a need that can be fulfilled for especially a Black trans person in your life. Like, even if it's folding their laundry or cooking them dinner, there's ways you can show up for the Black trans people in your life because we are going through it. That would be my message, is that you need to show up for Black trans people, but also the others that are doing the work and making sure that there is a future that's worth living for the next generation of children and for the generation of elders, so that they can leave this earth knowing that all the work that they did so that I could be my flaming ass self on testosterone wasn't in vain, I feel that we always talk about the youth, but I also spend a lot of time with queer elders. And that would be also a message that I would like to relay, is to get to know your elders. Like, everything that has allowed me to survive and allowed me to live and allowed me to stay here has been as a result of a queer elder. Some stunt they've taught me, some scam they've taught me, something they've taught me to make my life livable so that I don't have to suffer the way they suffered. And so that's like the only thing I can impress upon you, is look to them for support. They know where the shit is. The same way the kids know where all the cool shiny stuff is, the old girls know where all the stuff that you actually need is. Loving all of my identities and the multifacetedness of them, loving my trans identity, loving the time that I spent living a very hyperfeminine life as a child model, and also loving the time that I've spent living a very masculine life as someone who hangs out at a bathhouse occasionally. I think the duality of everything that I have going on inside of me is part of my self-love, because it took a lot to embrace those things. When I was transitioning, I was basically told, oh, you're supposed to have hated your girlhood. Oh, you're supposed to hate everything girly. Oh, you never can wear makeup. Oh, you can never do this, that, and the other again. But it's ironic, because now that I looked at it like I do, I've actually come to love all those things that I was told that I should hate, but kind of felt ambivalent about. I couldn't enjoy them as a girl. And now, as someone who's read more often than not, as a cis, effeminate gay man, it's totally encouraged and like celebrated for me to like these things. So that was a really difficult thing, was finding that self-love and learning that like my femininity is just as valid as my masculinity, and the fact that I'm on the trans-masculine spectrum does not mean that I have to abandon all of those things. That was a huge part about loving myself, because all the message that I was being told was like, get a six-pack, cut off all your hair, do this, do that, look like a man, want to be a man, only chase women. I still love the person that I was. I don't love all the things she did, but like I love who she was, and I love how she navigated the world. But I also love the person that I am now.